225 of the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. This is your host, Jackson Mumey. I'm glad to be with you in what I'm going to unaffectionately call our train wreck edition, looking at the California bar exam results from July 2018. I'm going to do a deep dive today on those California results. They are the worst in history. They are beyond belief, really, of what anything that has occurred previously. And I think it merits some deeper discussion. And I'm going to talk today as well about 5 things I think should be done to improve California results that I think the examiners can do. In other episodes, we'll talk about things that we're doing with our students to help them prepare and pass the exam. But I thought today I'd talk systemically about some things that I think are structurally unfair and need to be changed. So, if you haven't heard, California results were really, really bad. If you're not taking the California bar exam, feel fortunate. I think there's still a lot of information in today's episode that's going to be useful for you in terms of just thinking about the bar exam generally, but this is obviously pretty California-centric today. Before we jump into our discussion of those California results, a couple of housekeeping details. First of all, we want to wish all of you a very wonderful and happy Thanksgiving, no matter where you are and what you're doing. We do have a special video for how to study over the holidays. It's one that's gotten a lot of reaction over the years, and I recorded it before the Memorial Day, July 4th holidays a few years ago as an update, but it applies around Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's and the winter holidays as well. And we're going to link to that in our show notes, so be sure to check that out. It's a fairly short video, but it's a good one to watch before you go to the Thanksgiving dinner table. So we got that coming up. I also want to welcome all of you to the podcast. If this is your first time with us, we're glad to have you here. We prepare these podcasts in a couple of different formats. If you would prefer to watch the video, you can do that by going to celebrationbarreview.com/225. That's the episode number. You can watch the video, and then you'll see the show notes right there as well. If you prefer to listen to the podcast, you can do that on Apple iTunes or Spotify or iHeart. You got a lot of different choices, and I think we're syndicated in more places than that. And again, there are show notes there as well. And then all of our prior episodes are available on our website under the tab that says podcasts. You can check that out going back to our very first episode. So different ways of getting the information, whatever works best for you. We're really glad you're here. We appreciate you taking time out of your day to find out all things bar exam related. Now, I do want to invite all of you that are watching or listening today to a special live training that we're doing on Thursday, November 29th. This webinar, this live training, is titled Do Something Different. Make the next bar exam your last bar exam. It's a look at the 4 steps that successful bar takers follow in order to pass their bar exams. We'll be using case studies. We'll take you step by step through the things that you have to do. It's really valuable, and we've had thousands of people go through this training, and I really encourage you to join us if you haven't been through the training. And it's completely free. All you have to do is register in advance, and you can do that. There are links on the show notes pages for the video and audio, or you can go to our website at celebrationbarreview.com/webinar. So that's /webinar, and sign up there. Now, if Thursday, the 29th of November at 7 p.m. Eastern, that would be 4 o'clock Pacific time, if that doesn't work on your schedule or you just don't want to wait that long, we have a daily video on demand version of the same material. You'll see the link there, and you can just sign up and watch it right away. The advantage, of course, of being on the live video training with me is that I'll do a Q&A at the end. That's always interesting, and I'll be glad to answer any questions that you've got. But if you're doing the on-demand, you can send your questions via email within the webinar, and I'll get those and reply to you. So whatever works best for you, I just really want to see you doing something different. I think that this training will give you some great ideas of things that you can do differently. So, with that in mind, let's jump to the California July 2018 results. I'm going to give you some numbers first, then we'll break it down and talk about some things I think that could be done. The first thing that I think you have to know is the overall pass rate. And the overall pass rate, the one that you want to be hearing, is 40.7%. That's right. Less than 41% of all California bar takers in July passed the exam. 6 out of 10 failed their tests. That is an extraordinarily low number. Now, the pass rate for first-time bar takers was 55%. That's very low when you compare it to other big states like New York, Florida, Texas, Georgia, much, much lower than even those states had on this exam. When we look at that number of 40.7, this is a 9 percentage point drop from the July 2017 test, and this is important. You want to compare July to July here because of the mix of bar takers. So if we go back to July 2017, that was 9% higher, and a 9% drop on the bar exam is monstrous. I mean, that is virtually unheard of, and it's just stunning. The first-time bar taker pass rate, as I said, was 55%, but that's down by 8% from last July. So again, that is a really, really big number to be dropping. I think that when you look at it, you just kind of takes your breath away. It's such a big drop. And yet, interestingly enough, the mean scaled MBE, multi-state bar number, was 1404. So that's a 140.4 if we're putting in regular numbers. The national average is 139.5. So California bar takers did a little less than 1 full point better than the national mean, but 14 or 140 still is less than the passing number you need of 144. So the mean in California was 4 points less than what you needed to pass. Now, the bar examiners in California released a press release, which I thought was unprecedented. It's the first time I could ever recall a bar examiner press release citing statistics from other jurisdictions. But here's what the state bar in California said. They pointed out, first of all, that the National Conference of Bar Examiners pass rate for the multi-state went to a 34-year low in 2018. Then they pointed out that the pass rate in Texas went down 7 points, and the state pass rate in New York went down by 5 points, and that then sort of sneaking in, oh, by the way, our rate in California went down by 9 points. That is really remarkable. The number of students passing in all of these big jurisdictions certainly has dropped. Florida went down, Pennsylvania went down, Indiana went down. There's a number of different examiners and examinations where the scores went down. But when it's all said and done, California leads the league. And here's another interesting, terrible fact, which is that California has not had more applicants pass the bar exam than fail the exam since 2013. So for 5 years, more people have failed the California bar than have passed it. Now, I want to just stop for a moment and make a point here. There are a couple of big box bar review companies that prepare well over 90% of the people in California, and they trumpet year after year, exam after exam, that they're the courses, the gold standard that everyone should follow, that everyone should be using IRAC-style writing, that they should be memorizing and reciting rules and elements. How do you justify that in light of more people failing than passing? It's ridiculous to me. It's redonkulous too. But the point is that literally, if those tools were really effective, I cannot believe you'd have more people fail than pass. And yet the big box companies continue to go out there and assert that what they're telling people to do is the way to pass the exam. And frankly, I think at some point, bar takers have to look up and say, wait a minute, something's wrong here. You just can't keep telling us that this is the way to study when most people are failing. And so I think that finally we may be coming to a point of, I think a tipping point or an inflection point, where bar takers are going to start to look up and say, wait a minute, what you're telling us to do, the way you're telling us to traditionally prepare is not working. And now for 5 years, 10 exams in a row, it has not worked at all. Now, what did the bar examiners say about this? Well, they made an interesting comment. Leo Wilson, who's the executive director of the State Bar of California, says, "We're troubled by a low pass rate, and we're working to better understand the reasons behind this national trend." First of all, it may be a national trend, but you're the ones leading it in California. And secondly, if you're troubled by the pass rate, you can change it. So I think that it's really a disingenuous statement, candidly, and I think it's a patronizing statement, and I was really surprised to see that. Ms. Wilson goes on to say that over the last 18 months, they've conducted 4 distinct studies to determine if the passing score in California is appropriate and the content valid. And then she says, while these studies did not suggest that changes should be made at this time, which is not entirely true. Some of those groups did say, in fact, changes were very much required, but they said the State Bar takes seriously its commitment to ensuring integrity and fairness in the admissions process. And then she goes on to say, we've launched a California attorney job analysis study to collect information about the knowledge and skills that entry-level attorneys need, as if they didn't know that information previously or haven't known it over the past years. And she says the job analysis will form the basis of a new review of the exam itself to ensure that the exam is relevant and testing what's needed. But then that study is currently expected to be published in December of 2019, which means it would have no impact until maybe 2020 or beyond. In addition to that, the California bar examiners did something called the Productive Mindset Study, which was a very minimalist attempt to do what we've done at Celebration Bar Review for years, which is to work on mindset. And I'll be interested to see the results. It's the right idea, but it's a it was a very thin effort. A couple of emails is not really enough to change somebody's mindset, and I don't expect much to happen there. Well, let's break the numbers down a little bit further in California. I know the news is bad. We'll make it a little bit worse. The overall pass rate was 55%, but that doesn't really tell the whole story. The pass rate for repeat bar takers was 16%. That's right, 16%. That is stunning by any measure that we've ever seen. When we get to repeat bar takers by category, if you went to a California ABA school and you're a repeat bar taker, your pass rate was 22%. If you went to an ABA school out of California, repeat bar takers' pass rate was 12%. If you went to a California accredited but not ABA accredited school, the repeat taker rate was 9%. And if you went to an unaccredited fixed facility or correspondence or distance learning, your pass rate was between 6 and 10%. And then all others, which means foreign attorneys, 16%. So when you put that together, that total of 16% is absolutely a mess, and it's as bad as it could be. What about for first-time rates? Because obviously the first-time takers, that's a big group. If you're a California ABA student, 64%. Not great, but comparable with a couple of states, I think. If you're an out-of-state ABA student, it was 58% for a first-time pass rate. And those two numbers are not bad, but then it really drops off the cliff. Now remember, we're talking about first-time takers here. For California accredited, not ABA, first-time pass rate students, 16%. So if you went to one of the California accredited schools, that first-time pass rate is 16%. That is absolutely unacceptable. That frankly amounts to a ripoff for the students that went to those schools. And if you went to an unaccredited, either a fixed facility or a correspondence school or distant learning, the pass rate there ranged from 11% to 23% for first-time takers. So again, absolutely a miserable score, and those schools are simply not producing students that are passing the exam. And then for foreign attorneys, 31% for first-time takers. That includes attorneys' exams. Of the 500 plus attorneys who took the one day of the exam, a total of 32% passed. So that's what we've got there. That just about mirrors that foreign and other attorney requirements. So that's what we see. There were 8,000 plus applicants in the exam. 5,100 of them were first-time applicants, and almost 3,000 were repeat applicants. So that gives you a sense of the overall numbers and transition. Now, if you want to put this in historical perspective, these scores were a 67-year low. 67%, 67-year low. So older than I am. That is how bad it was in California. Well, that kind of kicks your butt, doesn't it? Some people have asked what was on the exam. Let me just talk briefly about that, and then I will talk about my suggestions to improve the exam. There were 5 essays and 1 performance test. The first essay was remedies. Some people called this a contracts question. It was a remedies problem in contracts, 2 very different things. I think people that tried to treat it as a contracts question probably got dinged in their scores. It was a remedies problem. The second question was California-based evidence, not multi-state evidence or the federal rules of evidence. It was state-specific evidence question. The third question was California and ABA model rules in professional responsibility. Now, this is a topic that gets tested a lot in California. This was interesting because you had both California and the ABA, and you were specifically told to answer under both. So I think that may have caused some difficulty for people. Topic four was Topic four was community property. This was a pretty traditional community property question. There was some discussion about it being too narrow in terms of what it was asking, but this looks a lot like most community property essays and questions that you would see in California. And then the fifth and final essay was constitutional law. This looked a lot like an exam that was given in 2005 in constitutional law, which may tell you something about what has or hasn't changed in some areas of that topic. But it was also, in my view, a pretty straightforward question. These were not outrageously hard essay questions, and I want to make that point because I know there are going to be some people that say, oh, the questions were incredibly hard. I don't think that's true. If I slipped a couple of these questions into a bigger body of questions from other jurisdictions like Florida or Georgia or Texas or the UBE, I'm not sure, other than the length of the question in some cases, that you would know the difference. It's simply not all that different and not that much harder. And that's significant because if the questions themselves aren't harder, then what's causing this result? And I'm going to come to that in a minute. But that's what we had in the essays. The performance test was a 90-minute performance test, looked really just like a multi-state performance test. It was a persuasive brief to the court. There was nothing particularly unusual in terms of the length or the focus or the difficulty of the problem. It could, again, be put into a multi-state performance test listing and you wouldn't know the difference at all. So again, I think relatively straightforward. But in the scoring of the California exam, the performance test was worth double its weight. So important that students be prepared for that. So that's the analysis of the California exam. If you're a California bar taker, you probably know all of that, but that's the information that we have. All right. Well, I want to transition now to something that I think is probably more widespread. And if you're not a California bar taker, I think you're going to want to stick with me because I think that this could apply in a lot of different settings. But I want to talk about 5 very specific suggestions or recommendations that I would make to the bar examiners to improve results on the California bar from their end. And as I said later, we will talk about, in other episodes, we'll talk about things that we're doing already at Celebration Bar Review to help our students be successful on the test. And by the way, congratulations to our students who were successful. We've got some incredible stories. I'm hoping that we can bring those to you in interviews in the upcoming weeks. All right, well, here's item number 1. And item number 1 is I think the California examiners should begin the practice of releasing what's called a drafter point sheet. Now, let me tell you what a drafter point sheet is. If you are taking the UBE, you've probably already seen them, particularly if you're in our course. The drafter point sheets are literally the scoring templates and documents that are given by the drafters of the questions to the graders. This is the document that shows what the writer of the question was thinking about, what they thought the important points were, the background law, the variety of responses that might be appropriate, the things to consider, and the weight of each part of the question. So call 1 of the question was worth 15%, call 2 was worth 25%, and so on. This is important to have because not only does it show what the grader is looking for, but it now presents a blueprint or a template for bar students to begin to understand as they're working and practicing what's important or not important. How important is it to cite case names or to get into detail? How important is it to give the elements of the rule of law that aren't in dispute? The drafter point sheet will give you that information. And the drafter point sheets are released by the National Conference of Bar Examiners for the UBE. So that's now 33 jurisdictions that are doing this. And we are seeing an uptick in scores generally as students begin to use these drafter point sheets. Our students have done very well, better than the national norms. We think in part it's because we release those drafter point sheets and we utilize them for our students. So I think it makes a big difference, and I would encourage the California bar examiners to do the same thing. They're writing their own questions. They've got a drafter point sheet. It's not difficult to release it. It's not giving away any inside information. And using the model of the National Conference of Bar Examiners, it would be a very simple process to release those after the exam and let applicants see what's really going on. What did the examiners think was important? Right now, we have to reverse engineer every question. We have to look at the question, look at what people wrote, look at the scores the examiners gave them, and try and decipher what they thought was important. That's a very difficult task to do. Now, I've spent the better part of 30 years doing that. I think I've got a pretty good handle on it, but I don't think that there are many people that are really competent and capable of doing that. And I don't think that most of the big box bar reviews are even making the effort to do that for their students. So I think, frankly, we've got an awful lot of repeat bar takers who simply don't know what it is they're supposed to do. These drafter point sheets would make a difference, and they would provide guidance that I think should be offered, and it's really equitable to do that. I see no reason why the examiners couldn't or shouldn't produce that document and make it available when they release the essays after the exam and results are out. So that's the first thing I would do, is to add these point sheets. The second thing I'm going to do, or that I would suggest doing, will be more controversial, and that is, I think you need to upgrade the quality of the people that are grading the essays and the performance tests. Now, I've railed about this for a long time, but I absolutely cannot understand why anyone who is a competent member of the bar would choose to grade essays for $3.25 an answer. The way that the Cal Bar has set this up is that most bar graders make about $1,000. It's a gig. It's a weekend or two worth of work. It is not something that's going to attract the best and the brightest. I know that there are people out there that believe in the mythology that law professors and senior partners and judges are all the ones grading their exams. That is absolutely untrue in California. The bar examiners aren't even grading your exams. They are going on Craigslist and FindLaw and other job seeker sites, and they are saying, hey, if you took and passed the California bar at some point, I guess first or second try, then you can grade essays for us, and the pay is $3.25 an answer, with a limit, I think, of $1,000. That seems to be where it is. Now, I'm not disparaging that these people aren't wonderful people, but let's get real here. How many of you would do this work for $3.25 an answer? And I think the reality is that you've got people grading these essays who are just doing it to get it done, make a few dollars on the side, and get out of there. But they're also the people, frankly, who are competing for the jobs that are too few and far between in California for attorneys. If you're a well-employed attorney, if you're working at a good firm or doing important work or busy, you are not going to grade Cal Bar essays. Not going to happen. And so the people doing this work, by definition, are under or unemployed. Now, think about it just practically for a minute. If you are an unemployed California attorney and you're grading essays, what's your incentive to give anyone the benefit of the doubt when it comes time to grade these answers? I think the reality is not much. And so you've got a built-in bias by the people that are doing the grading. I don't think that these are the right people to be grading. And frankly, we can't even get the information about how they're being trained. Now, I've seen some people that claim to be former California bar graders who talk about what should be done. And frankly, if they're representative of what the bar graders are, then we're all in big trouble. Because really what most of these people say is, you should memorize and recite all the elements. Really? Because that's what the big box bar reviews are telling their students to do, and most of them are failing. How can that possibly be the case? And yet I hear people say, well, I know this because I was a bar grader. Well, really, what are the bar graders doing? What are they being told? What direction are they being given? What point sheets are they being given? Well, that goes back to point number one. I'd like to see those. But point number two is we got to get better graders out here. I recognize that with 8,000 bar takers and 5 essays and a performance test, it's a lot of papers to move around. There's a lot of work to do. There are budget constraints. There are things that have to be done. But frankly, we've got to get a higher quality grader out there. The bar examiners need to hire professional graders. They need to bring people in from the law schools. They need to bring people back from the active practice of law. We need to return this grading process to what it was 15 or 20 years ago when we had qualified members of the bar doing the grading. If we're not going to get qualified members of the bar doing the grading, then we need much, much more direction about what it is that's appropriate. I see wild swings in second reads of essays. Someone will get a 50 on one essay on reading one, and then they'll be in a reread, and in reading two, they get 70 or 75. How can that possibly be? There's no standardization going on. There's no consolidation of the reading. And I think it's just hit or miss. I think a lot of it depends on which examiner you get to see. And so I think that that is a huge part of the problem here. Am I not showing any love to the bar graders? I guess not. send your hate mail to jackson@celebrationbarreview.com. But really, other jurisdictions do a much better job of grading than California. Even big states like New York and Florida and Texas, they do a much, much better job. And I think California can do better, should do better, and must do better with their graders than they're doing. And frankly, if they can't do that, then they need to get out of the business. All right. Oh, that's going to piss off a lot of people. All right, number 3. Here we go. Number 3, release the results earlier. Oh, come on, California. You're by far the last jurisdiction in the country to release your bar results. Big states like Florida and Texas and New York are out a month, 6 weeks, 8 weeks before you. And here's California lagging behind. Now, this year, the results came out a week before Thanksgiving. This gives the next bar-taking group less than 100 days to prepare for the exam, and that's just not fair anymore. The days that you could prepare for the bar exam in 6 or 7 weeks are long gone. And if you're a bar repeater, trying to climb that mountain again in under 100 days is a huge, huge challenge. I hate to have people sit out an exam. I want to see them get right back in and study. But the truth is, a Cal bar repeater has got literally 6 fewer weeks to study than a Florida bar repeater sitting on the same dates for the bar exam. Now, how in the world is that equitable? How is it fair for a California bar taker taking the multi-state in February, the same test that a Florida bar taker is taking in February for the multi-state, and yet the Cal student has weeks less to prepare? There is no reason for these results to come out as late as they do. I think it is absolutely abhorrent that that happens. I think that it represents a lack of consideration of the bar takers. If you need more people, hire more people. If you got to work faster, work faster. I mean, you're not doing a great job already. I've said that in item 2. I mean, couldn't you go faster and still do the same poor job? At the very least. I think this idea of being the last state to release results is really become a point of perverse pride in California, and it's got to stop. There's no rational reason for it except that the California examiners are wasting time. They have the multi-state scores within hours after the exam is done. It's machine scored. There are 5 essays in California. There are more essays than that in other jurisdictions, and the performance test. It certainly can be done faster than they are doing it. The UBE has got 6 essays and 2 performance tests, and it gets out in 33 jurisdictions, including the state of New York, a month before California releases their results. So get the results out earlier. All right, number 4. Well, this is the big one. Number 4 is I think you got to modify the cut score, the passing score, to reflect national norms. Modify the cut score to reflect national norms. Here's what I mean. When you take the California score, don't be misled by this 1440. It's really a 144. You can drop off the last 0, and you now have the actual reality of the score. A 144 in California means you have to get a 144 on the multi-state out of 200 and a 144 on the written part. That's what it takes to pass the exam. All right, let's compare that for a moment to what it takes to pass in New York with the UBE. In New York, you need a 266, not a 288 that you'd need in California. So that means you have a 22-point difference between California and New York. Now, I'm not the first person to make this comment, but really, you don't have to be 22 points smarter to practice law in California. Trust me, I know plenty of California attorneys. It is not a necessity. And I think that when you start looking at that kind of a disparity, you start saying, wait a minute, what's going on here? Well, the answer is obvious. There are too many people in California that want to become members of the bar. So it becomes a quota. It becomes a restrictive trade arrangement, and there's no reason for it. It's not living up to the national norm. Now, I don't want to just use New York as an example. In Florida, we would say that with their 136 doubled up, that's a 272 compared to a 288 in California. So again, 16 points lower in Florida. How about in Texas or Georgia? Those are 270 in both of those jurisdictions. So again, an 18-point difference between those jurisdictions. And we could go through a list of jurisdictions. The highest UBE score that I can think of off the top of my head would be the 280 in Alaska, I think it is. Who knows why? But that's even 8 points easier than the California exam. So this 288, that's the real number in California. Don't be misled by 1440. It's 288. That's the normed number, is way too high. And there's no justification for it. In spite of what Ms. Wilson says from the California bar examiners, there's been no justification for this. There's been no reason to assume that practicing law is dramatically more difficult or complicated in the state of California than it is any other state in the union. I would argue that in many ways it's less complicated because it's more general and more generic. And so the reality is that if big states like New York, Illinois, Massachusetts, New Jersey, jurisdictions like the District of Columbia, jurisdictions like Florida, Texas, and Georgia can all find ways to get their norms and their scores down, then California could do the same as well. It is hard to not reach the conclusion that California has set an arbitrary number and decided to keep the number up there high at the 288, and then to give platitudes about, we're so sorry that people didn't reach that number and we have no idea why it's happening at all, but there you go, that's what we're doing. Now, I think there's another point to this, and it's not often remarked on, but I think it's worth saying. In California, we've got the distance schools, the unaccredited schools, the fixed facility schools, the correspondence schools. Those schools have, as you saw, dramatically lower pass rates. It's important to note that the student population from those schools generally comes from a disadvantaged population, either second career, third career, fourth career students, women, minorities, people that may not be given as many opportunities as a traditional Stanford 3L would have had in life. And frankly, when you make the test this difficult, you virtually assure that the people coming from those schools have little to no chance of passing. Is that really what they want to do in California? We really want to make the bar look like only the students from Stanford, USC, UCLA are the only ones that can pass the bar? It doesn't make much sense. And I think that's really part of what's going on here. One could argue that the entirety of the scoring system is designed to make sure that only the privileged class, those people that could afford the time and the money to go to a traditional high-end law school, will be successful. And frankly, we see it even when we get outside of California in the ABA schools that are outside of California. They have an atrocious pass rate as well. And then we've got foreign attorneys, and foreign trained attorneys are not doing well on this exam. Now, that's a trend across the country, no doubt about it. We're seeing a low pass rate for foreign attorneys in New York, in Texas, in Georgia, in every jurisdiction that admits them. But in California, it is just horrific. And frankly, to take foreign attorneys into this exam, to allow them to take the exam and give them such a small chance of success is, I think, unconscionable. And therefore, it's really important that there be an honest and open acknowledgement that foreign attorneys are going to have to put in a lot more time, a lot more effort. They're going to have to be much, much more fluent in English than I think many of them are, if they're going to have any chance at all at a 288 score. So my advice to you, if you're a foreign trained attorney or if you went to an ABA accredited school, is don't take the California bar exam. Go somewhere else, get admitted somewhere else. And we've talked about that elsewhere. But if you went to an ABA, California only accredited or an unaccredited school, or you're a foreign attorney and you can only sit in California, well, then you've got a tough road ahead of you. And until the examiners modify this cut score, it is going to be a stacked deck, frankly, across the board. And then finally, the fifth thing, which is sort of a catch-all, is I think that the examiners in California play hide the ball. I've said this in terms of the drafter point sheets in point 1, but I mean it in a different way. What happens in California is that, as I said, the examiners get the score sheet from the multi-state almost immediately. They know what your score is on the multi-state. And you can statistically model with pretty close accuracy how someone's going to do on the overall exam based on their MBE score. What I mean by that is if you got a 120 or a 125 on your multi-state as a scaled score, and remember you need a 144 in California, the odds of you passing the overall bar exam go down to almost zero, maybe 2 or 3% based on those statistical models. Well, the examiners have that modeling. They know that the people that get low scores on the multi-state will not pass. Now, in some jurisdictions, like Georgia, If you don't reach a minimum threshold on your multi-state, they don't even bother to read your essays because, frankly, what's the point? And they get their results out a little bit earlier because they don't have to read all those essays. But in California, they play a disingenuous game. They pretend to read your essays, and they pretend to grade them as though it was completely a blind grading. I don't believe that. And I've seen no evidence to prove that that's really what happens. Here's what I think actually occurs. Those applicants that are within the reread range, which would mean about a 139 up to a 144, their essays will be grouped together and be read by a group of graders who have fewer essays to read in a period of time. It's a subtle way of signaling to those graders that these are more important essays and the reading needs to be more careful. Now, if you were in that low group, let's say you got a 110 or a 115 or a 120 on your multi-state score, your essays are put into a stack and given to a grader who's got a whole lot of essays to read for that same period of time. And the implicit message there is these people won't pass. Why? Because they won't. And therefore, you can read it and grade it however you'd like to. And so what you see is a lot of 50s and 55s. Now, occasionally these days we even see 40s and 45s, which is amazing to me. But what that means is that the graders are just doing a quick, I get my $3.25. Let me just do this. I'll take maybe 2 or 3 minutes to read it. I know this person isn't going to pass. And because of that, what we get is this misleading view of their work. It could be that low-scoring MBE student actually does better essay writing or performance test writing. It is very unlikely that we will see that, however. I have looked at hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of California bar scores over the years, and certainly over the last 10 years, and I can tell you for a fact that there is a correlation between the MBE score and the quality of the grading that we see on the essays and performance tests. This was true in the 3-day exam. It's still true today in the 2-day exam. I think the reality is that the examiners are not being straightforward with the applicant pool. They ought to just say, if you don't hit a certain number, we're really not reading your essays. We're required to, but it really doesn't matter. Instead, there is this I think sort of playing a game that suggests that they're really reading them and really scoring them. And I think that causes all kinds of misunderstanding. I think it causes students to think that their essay writing is much worse than it may be. It may also cause them to put much less emphasis on their multi-state. My philosophy and my strategy for students is get the multi-state score to the 144 number, and then we'll take care of the writing. Because if you're not in that range, that 139 to 144 or higher, you're simply not getting a fair read of your written work. And I've seen that happen over and over again. We had students again in this last exam where I've seen that happen before. They got their multi-state score up this time, and now the result is that they passed the exam. Why? Because now their essays are getting read properly and appropriately. And I know that this is really frustrating in part for attorney applicants because they're the ones that say, well, wait a minute, what happens to us? Well, you're imputed a passing score, so I think you get a better read than some other folks, but I don't think you're getting a great read. In fact, I think many of you that are attorney applicants may be more qualified than the people grading your essays, and I think that's part of the problem here. So when we look and break down those numbers, I think we see consistently the people that could be passing in other jurisdictions should be passing in other jurisdictions. I mean, if you got a 260, but not a 288 in California, you could have passed. You could be admitted to the bar in some other jurisdiction. And if that's the case, you ought to be thinking about doing that instead of sitting for the California exam, if that's an option for you. So I guess what I'm really saying here with this fifth point is I think the examiners are not being forthcoming, and I think they need to be. I think they need to point out what they're doing and then acknowledge that if you're not hitting a certain mark, whatever they think that is, that they're simply not reading your essays and performance tests with much clarity. Well, I am not going to make any friends in the great state of California with this podcast episode. I'm sure that there are examiners and big box bar reviews and probably a few big box law schools that would prefer that no one ever say these things, that there be no discussion, that we just continue to go and do the same old thing and get the same old results. I hope you can tell by now that I don't think that that's appropriate. It's not what should be happening. It's not fair. It's not equitable. And for those who are taking the California bar exam, who've put their time and their energy, their money, their lives on hold to pass the exam, they deserve to be treated fairly. Now, it's our mission and our goal to help those people, to get them over the line, to do what we have to do. That's why we offer training like we're doing with the do something different, make the next bar exam your last bar exam, because we know that there is a way to help people who've been unsuccessful pass the exam. Even when they've been unsuccessful many, many, many times, double-digit failures, we can help you get through the exam. But we do it in part by being honest and open-eyed about what's going on. I think closing your eyes and assuming that everything's okay, that we just don't know why people aren't passing, that's crazy. We know exactly why they're not passing. And I don't think it's because they're less competent or less industrious or less intelligent or less capable. I think it's because the exam is stacked against a lot of people. I think it's graded ineffectively and inappropriately. And I think there's a lot of misdirection that's going on, a lot of attempts to make it look one thing when it's really something else. So those are my thoughts and ideas. I'll put them out there. If you've got comments, I would love to hear them. I imagine there will be some comments to this episode, and I'll be glad to share those in upcoming episodes. So feel free to email me or comment in the show notes or let us know. We would love to hear from you. Our Facebook page is Celebration Bar Review. Feel free to jump onto the Facebook page and let us know your thoughts as well. If you're sitting for the California exam and you failed in July, you need to make a decision and move forward quickly. As I said, there's very little time here, and we would love to work with you. We'd love to help you and help you find a way to pass this exam. Don't give up. It is difficult, but not impossible. And I think when you've got a course and an approach that recognizes what the exam is really testing and helps you deliver that product in a wide open, eyes open environment, that's the best chance that you've got for success. All right, well, that's our episode for this week. A little different episode. I hope that those of you that are not California takers stayed with me. I could say a lot of the same things about other states, but you can see this is the one. These guys are pretty crazy. So I wish everybody the best. I hope all of you have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Please don't bring your bar review books to the Thanksgiving table. It's a bad idea. Enjoy your turkey or whatever the festive meal is, and then you can go back and study when you're done. And we'll see you again next week along the Extra Mile. We'll have more great information, I hope, for you. I'm sure we will. And interviews and discussion, and look forward to seeing all of you then. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.